Good evening, every pony. Now, before I start talking about today's fic, I want to ask you all something. Have any of you ever read something that you weren't really feeling at the start, but then as time went on, you got more and more into it? Because that's basically what happened to me when I started reading the story The God Empress of Ponykind by Iowa Forever. This story is a bit of a strange one, because I'll be honest, when I first started reading this fic, I was sure that I was gonna hate it. But surprisingly, as time went on, I actually found that there were a lot of enjoyable things in this story. And while there definitely are still some things that I don't like about it, I still applaud it for being able to greatly change my opinions on it overall. So what's the story? Well, The God Empress of Ponykind is a crossover / alternate universe story between My Little Pony and Warhammer 40,000. The most logical of combinations, of course. And keep this crossover choice in mind, because for people who know nothing about Warhammer, this is where things are going to get a tad complicated. In the 40k lore, the ruler of humanity is known as the Emperor. The Emperor and humanity are engaged in a never-ending war with the forces of chaos. Nah, a little uglier than that? There you go. The Emperor is able to travel to what I believe is another plane of existence called the Warp, where he proceeds to do battle with 4 all-powerful demon lords who are commanding the forces on the ground. And the Emperor is able to travel to this plane because essentially he's a god. As he finishes his battle against these 4, they use their combined powers to send him to a desolate planet and transform him from a human into a pony. A pony that we all know and love as Princess Celestia. From there on in, geez, a ton of things happen. Celestia smashes planets together, she builds Equestria, she develops races and fights in wars. Hell, the entire second half of this story is basically a bunch of wars that Celestia fights in. Now, I'll be honest, the main reason that I wasn't really feeling this story at the start was because of the premise. It just felt a little strange to me to believe that the kind-hearted, fair ruler of Equestria was once a mighty warlord who wasn't exactly the nicest guy around. But strangely enough, as the story went on, the more I actually forgot that that's how this whole adventure started. Because there is actually a good bit of character development in this story. We see the Emperor start to become more involved with his people, and we see him learning new ways of ruling. In addition, the Emperor's attitude towards his equestrian armies really tells a lot about him. In the scenes where he does interact with his soldiers, while he does come across as being a very tough leader, at his core you really see that the Emperor is certainly a father to his men kind of character. Hell, we even see him getting more in touch with his sensitive side while he interacts with Luna, both while she's growing up and where he explains to her about the world around her and being a good ruler, all the way up to when she becomes an adult. Because, you know, doesn't he just look like the most sensitive of souls, ladies? Something else I quite like about this story is its overall portrayal of Celestia. Not really in the sense of her being a benevolent ruler, so to speak, but more expanding on the idea of Celestia being a god. Because the Emperor possesses the ability to manipulate something called the Warp, which is essentially where magic comes from, she can use this ability to do some really crazy shit to both create and destroy things in the world. These abilities range from shooting a giant screw you laser at her enemies, engulfing both herself and her enemies in fire, shape-shifting, and being able to enter in and out of the Warp dimension in order to fight some powerful creatures, like the Wendigos. Using her Warp manipulation, she's also able to crash 2 planets together in order to jumpstart life on Equestria. And that's not the only thing that she does, because this warp ability, yeah, this is what she uses to raise the sun every day, and it's also what she uses to create life. Albeit that's done in a genetics lab, but I'll get to that when I get to it. The residents of Equestria see her power as a sign of her being some kind of godlike figure, and as a result, some of them start to worship her as a god. Personally, I quite like seeing Celestia being interpreted this way. And in keeping with this idea of her being a god, she even has a few churches set up in her honor to worship her. Solar Empire, I have located your next meeting ground. Finally, on the good points, I want to talk about Luna for a second. You know, since this fandom very rarely does. This story takes you back through what happened when Luna turned into Nightmare Moon. And while it is a little strange that in this story Nightmare Moon's motives have changed from wanting to bring about eternal night to wanting to destroy Celestia, I will say this. The build-up to Luna's betrayal is excellent. The story builds up to Nightmare Moon's takeover very well. At about the halfway point of the fic, Luna becomes haunted by this ghostly voice in the back of her mind that refuses to leave, and the story creates a lot of mystery with this voice in her head. With every chapter, the reader is reminded of Luna's plight of having to endure this voice and the thoughts that it puts into her head, talking about how it wants her to see that Celestia actually doesn't care about her or any of the things that she's created. And ultimately, it's this that causes her betrayal. And as I said before, a lot of mystery is created with this voice, because I was really curious as to find out who it was. At first I thought that it might be Sombra, but a later chapter actually squashes that theory. All I'll say is that for those who know 40k lore, you'll know him, and those who don't might have to recall a few chapters back. But with all of that said, this is where I want to start getting into negatives with the story. Or at the very least, just things that I want to draw attention to. Now, the first thing isn't too much of a problem after Chapter 2, but in Chapter 2 is where the problem is most evident. The majority of this chapter shows a battle between the Space Marines and the Forces of Chaos, and the Emperor being transformed into Celestia. Throughout the story, there's a lot of mentionings of factions and devices and beings from the 40k universe. And while a veteran of the series would know what all of these things are, from the perspective of a casual 40k player, I think that they could have been conveyed a little better. Now I know that the story is primarily aimed at people who play Warhammer, but for the sake of argument, let's just say that someone who just wanted to read a Dark Celestia fic stumbles across your work and gives it a shot, and let's say that they know nothing about Warhammer. At points throughout the story, and especially the second chapter, I think that an outsider would be very confused as to what was going on or what the story was referring to. Writing a crossover with a similar style to this fic with an expectation that everybody who reads it will know the source material will just end up narrowing your audience. Little explanations as to what these things are I think would be a little helpful. Now again, this is really only in Chapter 2. The rest of the story does give little summaries to things either in the story itself or in author's notes. It was just the fact that the chapter that contained the most Warhammer-related stuff had very little explanations for that Warhammer-related stuff. And it just led me to believe that the story could lose readers as a result. My second issue, though, is a bit more of a biggie. In order to create things in this world, Celestia has to manipulate the warp. By doing so, she's able to create life. But she doesn't just do it on the spot. Instead, she builds a genetics lab. Not really sure why you need one of those. I mean, you can smash planets together and shoot a giant screw-you laser to incinerate your enemies, but okay, I'll roll with it. Basically, what I'm getting at is that Celestia can do or build anything. But I must know, if she can create a genetics lab to make life, why the hell doesn't she create guns for her soldiers? I mean, yeah, she gives them swords, crossbows, twin blades, basically every melee weapon under the sun. Hell, she even creates a damn suit of golden power armor for herself right at the start of the story. But you really expect me to believe that she didn't create guns? And you can't tell me that the reason that she didn't was because not all of the races could use them, okay? The master race, I mean, unicorns don't have an excuse, alright? We can use telekinesis, it's easy for us. But later in the story, Celestia gives an Earth Pony soldier a unicorn's helmet, and tells him that it contains enough energy for another pony to pick up a weapon. There's an opportunity there to have all of your forces wield firearms. It would make fighting so much easier. There are 2 chapters in this fic that are dedicated to wars. One against the Diamond Dogs and one against King Sombra. And I know that he's like a super magical evil lord of darkness, but I'm pretty sure that fighting King Sombra in a freaking tank would be way easier than fighting him mono a mono.
You're finished, Celestia. Now I shall spread my darkness across Equestria and...
You just saved us a chapter!
The entire thing just made no sense to me. So the last thing that I want to bring up is the voice in Luna's head and the reveal to who he is. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, lower your volume now. So once Nightmare Moon takes control of Luna, it's revealed that the voice is one of the 4 gods of chaos who the Emperor fought in the second chapter. It's undeniably a good callback, but the problem with this demon is his character. His motivation doesn't stretch much past he wants to kill Celestia because he's just evil. To be honest, it was just a letdown to realize that this was the motivation of this character who had been built up so well. I'm not sure if this is what he acts like in Warhammer lore, but yeah, his whole deal just disappointed me. All that said, though, I would like to say that I don't think this is a bad story. I like how the Emperor's character progresses, I like the ideas that the story has, and I think it has some excellent build-up for Luna transforming into Nightmare Moon. The problems that I listed off are more just things that I noticed rather than things that massively ruined the story for me. I will say that if you don't know anything about the Warhammer universe, it's probably not your thing, but if you're willing to try something that's a little bit different and creative, I say go ahead and give it a shot and draw your own conclusion. With all that said, thank you very much for watching. I'm EmeraldComet, and I'm still looking for a guy to fix this bloody hole in the wall. Oh, it should be gone in a week. There's no reason for you to worry. God damn it, Neon. Well, there's not exactly much that I can do about it now. I wonder what's on TV.